In the forgotten archives of the Wisconsin Diocese, there lies a sealed collection of documents the Church never intended for public eyes. Yellowed pages, marked privatus, bound with string, hidden behind brick and time. They speak of a convent, St. Mary's, a towering limestone estate nestled near Lake Michigan, built with blessings and buried in secrets. Between 1854 and 1862, 23 women in black habits vanished without a trace. Official church records list them as transferred, but no letters came, no goodbyes, only silence and fear. 3 witnesses, 3 investigators, one hidden wall, cracked open during renovation, exposing the truth the Vatican spent over a century to erase. What happened inside those cold stone halls was not the work of God, but something else entirely. If you've found your way here, you are among the few who seek what was never meant to be found. So listen closely, because this is the first and final account of St. Mary's Convent, the house of horrors the church tried to forget. The year was 1854. Morning fog rolled heavy off Lake Michigan, curling like ghostly fingers through the trees. A black carriage creaked through the iron gates of a remote estate, the future site of St. Mary's Convent. Inside sat Bishop William Quarter, eyes fixed on the gray spire rising from behind the trees. This was no humble chapel. It was a former lumber baron's mansion, limestone walls, Gothic arches, 3 massive wings, and a bell tower that loomed like a watchful eye over the wilderness. To the outside world, it was a bold statement, the Catholic Church planting its flag in the heart of Protestant Wisconsin. But to those who would soon call it home, it was something else entirely. That spring, 20 young Irish postulants arrived, women of quiet faith and uncertain futures. They were greeted not by joy but by silence. Locals stood at a distance, muttering slurs beneath their breath. Papists, they spat. Foreigners, witches in black. But inside the convent walls, Bishop Quarter preached hope. He spoke of mercy, charity, and healing. He introduced 3 women who would lead this holy sanctuary. Mother Catherine, tall, severe, with pale eyes that never blinked. Sister Elizabeth, soft-voiced, endlessly kinder, so it seemed. Sister Margaret, the healer, whose thin hands knew both herbs and other things. Together they would guide the new sisters, shape them, mold them, and behind closed doors begin something far more sinister. The bells rang for the first time that evening, their echoes stretched for miles, ringing in a new era of faith, sacrifice, and secrets that would not remain buried forever. If this tale is already sending chills down your spine, you're not alone. These are the stories they tried to erase, buried in dust, silence, and fear. But here we remember. Subscribe now to uncover more forgotten horrors, and let no name be lost to history again, because what comes next only grows darker. The daily rhythm of St. Mary's Convent began with silence and ended in it. From the moment the sisters arrived, life moved like clockwork. Matins at 3:00 a.m., prayers 7 times a day, meals of thin broth and bread, and long hours tending the orphanage, the infirmary, and the garden. Their chants in Latin floated over the frosted fields like prayers the wind refused to carry. At first, everything appeared ordinary. The orphanage filled with children, many abandoned after rail and lumber accidents. Sister Elizabeth smiled often, her warm hands combing the hair of girls with trembling eyes. She taught them numbers and hymns, offering gentle corrections and warm bread. Sister Margaret ran the infirmary with eerie efficiency. Her tinctures and salves cured fever and coughs even when local doctors failed. Families brought her gifts in thanks flowers, coins, a chicken or two. They never questioned how a nun, so far from Boston or New York, knew so much about anatomy, or how she always seemed to know when death was near. Outwardly, the convent was a success. Protestant villagers, once suspicious, now offered polite nods at Sunday Mass. Even Elijah Hoffman, the Lutheran elder who had once sneered at papist witchcraft, found himself muttering, "They do good work, at least," after Sister Margaret saved his grandson from pneumonia. But beneath the still surface, something shifted. Minor infractions, forgetting a prayer, breaking silence, laughing too loudly, were punished with increasing severity. A young sister caught giggling in the garden was assigned to kneel on dried peas until her knees bled. Another, who failed to finish a soup, was denied food for 2 days. The refectorians, echoing with whispers and quiet mirth, grew hollow and cold. The sisters sat in silence, their eyes cast downward, chewing bread like it was penance. Then came the first disappearance. "Take this to Father Thomas," she whispered, slipping the paper and a small silver cross into his hand. "Don't read it. Don't tell anyone. Just go." The boy nodded, solemn and pale. "Yes, sister." The note was brief, frantic, but clear. "Nuns disappearing, not transferred. Something evil happening here. Please help. I fear I'm next. Sister Mary Collins." Inside the chapel, the morning bell tolled. Sister Mary crossed herself, returned to her pew, and folded her hands. She had done the unthinkable. Now she could only wait and pray that someone, somewhere, would believe her before it was too late. Father Thomas Ryan was not a man easily shaken. Young, Irish-born and devout, he had been assigned to a small parish near Lake Michigan's St. Joseph's, where he offered monthly Mass at St. Mary's Convent. He had seen poverty, sickness, death, but never what Sister Mary's letter now suggested. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he read it under candlelight. His cassock still dusted with soil from the path. His fingers clutched the silver cross, a gift no nun would give lightly. His pulse quickened. He read the letter again. "Something evil happening here. I fear I'm next." He sat back, staring at the flickering candle. A chill crept into the room, though the fire burned strong. He had suspected something. Fewer and fewer sisters appeared at Mass with each visit. Names vanished from the prayer lists. Mother Catherine always had a reason: illness, reassignment, missionary work, but none of it had ever felt right. This note confirmed it, but what could he do? He first approached Bishop Henney of Milwaukee, hoping naively that the church would act swiftly to investigate. The bishop, however, waved off his concerns with practiced calm. "Transfers happen all the time, Father. St. Mary's has been generous to the diocese. Let's not be so quick to question." "But, Your Excellency," Father Ryan insisted, "8 nuns, all within 2 years." The bishop held up a hand. "You're young, you're passionate, but you're not yet wise. Focus on your parish, not on rumors." Father Ryan left the meeting deflated but not defeated. If the bishop would not act, he would find another way. In early March 1858, Father Ryan was given a rare opportunity to collect financial and spiritual records from religious institutions for the diocesan archives. This included St. Mary's. It was the excuse he needed. He arrived at the convent on a gray spring morning, the air damp with mist. From a distance, St. Mary's still looked like a monument to faith, its bell tower rising above the trees, its white limestone glowing in the haze. But up close, it seemed off. The windows dark, the garden untended, the bell itself no longer rang with the strength it once had. Sister Elizabeth met him at the door, her smile thinner than usual. Her eyes were tired, her hands, once warm and soft, now trembled slightly. "Father Ryan," she said with forced cheer, "we weren't expecting you today." "I've been sent to collect the records in person this year," he replied, stepping over the threshold. "The bishop's orders." Her smile didn't falter, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Please, make yourself comfortable in the parlor. Mother Catherine is indisposed." As she led him down the corridor, Father Ryan took in the details. Paint peeling from the walls, dust on the crucifixes, a smell not decay exactly, but something stagnant, rotten underneath the surface. The parlor was cold, fireless. He was told to wait, but he had no intention of staying seated. Under the pretense of revisiting the chapel, he began to explore. What he found chilled him. The orphanage, once home to dozens of children, now housed only a few pale, frightened faces. When he tried to speak to one girl, she was quickly whisked away by Sister Elizabeth. The infirmary, reportedly treating sick parishioners from across the region, was nearly empty. No signs of disease, no medical bustle, and Sister Margaret, the famed healer, was nowhere to be seen. Then, passing the laundry room, he asked casually, "And where is Sister Mary Collins?" The pause in Sister Elizabeth's step was brief but unmistakable. "She's been transferred just last week. St. Louis." The bishop asked for someone with her experience. Father Ryan nodded, but his blood turned to ice. She was gone. The woman who had begged for help was now gone. He asked to visit the chapel before he left. Permission granted. He knelt at the altar, praying but also listening, watching. The sisters moved like ghosts, eyes hollow, hands obedient. When the others were distracted, he slipped through a side hallway. It led to the convent's private quarters off limits, but now he didn't care. And there, at the end of the corridor, he heard it, a sound, not a prayer, not a chant, a whisper. He approached a heavy door, iron-bound and cold to the touch. Through the keyhole he could hear breath, ragged, a voice hoarse with pain. "Father, please, help us." His heart pounded. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a voice rang out behind him, sharp and commanding. "Father Ryan." He turned. Mother Catherine stood there, behind her, Sister Margaret, and beside them a man, broad-shouldered, in plain clothes, not clergy, not medical, but his eyes were hard, watchful, dangerous. "You are not permitted in this area," Mother Catherine said flatly. "Our sisters are in spiritual retreat. Your presence violates their sacred space." Father Ryan struggled to remain calm. "I heard a voice. Someone called out. Someone asked for help." "You heard a sister in deep mortification of the flesh," Sister Margaret said smoothly, stepping forward. "It's not uncommon in advanced contemplative practice." He knew it was a lie. The man beside them took a step forward, his grip tightening on a walking stick more club than cane. "This way, Father," he said. "You've seen enough." Father Ryan looked again at the locked door, at the cold faces, at the man's silent threat. He followed, but as he was escorted out, he memorized every step, every shadow, every sound. As soon as he passed the gate, he mounted his horse and rode fast, desperate. This was beyond anything he had imagined. This wasn't clerical error. This wasn't a lack of oversight. This was evil, and someone had to stop it. The message was clear. What Father Ryan had uncovered at St. Mary's wasn't just spiritual abuse or administrative neglect. It was systemic, coordinated, calculated, and monstrously effective. He returned to his parish that night soaked in rain, his cassock streaked with mud and fear, but in his hands he carried more than wet clothes, and holy book she carried the burden of what he'd seen and heard. The whispered plea behind the locked door, the cold denial in Mother Catherine's eyes, the lie that Sister Mary had gone to St. Louis. She hadn't gone anywhere. She had disappeared. The church's hierarchy had failed him. Bishop Henny refused to investigate. The diocese was compromised. Father Ryan knew what had to be done, bypassed the chain of command. So he did the unthinkable. He wrote directly to Archbishop John Hughes of New York, a man known for his resolve, his sharp mind, and his intolerance for corruption. Father Ryan's letter was brief, factual, and damning. Urgent spiritual and moral crisis at St. Mary's Convent in Wisconsin. Evidence of imprisonment, possible trafficking, and systemic abuse. Bishop Henny, unresponsive. Request immediate investigation. He included the cross Sister Mary had given him, and he prayed, harder than ever before. 2 weeks passed in silence. Then a reply. A single telegram. "Investigator en route. Maintain vigilance. Say nothing further to local clergy." The man sent was Monsignor Patrick Kelly, the Archbishop's personal secretary, a war-weathered cleric in his 50s, with gray at his temples and a gaze like sharpened stone. He arrived without vestments, without fanfare, just a small trunk, a sealed envelope of authority, and 2 fellow priests. On April 17, 1858, under a clear sky and a warm breeze, Monsignor Kelly's carriage rolled through the gates of St. Mary's. What they found stunned even the most hardened men of God. From the moment they arrived, the atmosphere was tense. The convent buzzed with unnatural activity, nuns moving too quickly, whispering too quietly. Papers were seen being rushed to the kitchens. Smoke curled up from the chimney, though no food was cooking. Father Ryan's heart sank. They were burning evidence. Mother Catherine greeted them with forced grace, her pale eyes sharp as razors. "We weren't informed of this visit," she said. "Bishop Henny always provides notice." "That's precisely why we did not," replied Monsignor Kelly, producing the Archbishop's sealed letter. "By order of His Grace, we are to inspect all areas, interview all residents, and examine all records. No exceptions." The silence that followed was long, tense. Mother Catherine's expression never changed, but her knuckles whitened where they clutched the edge of the altar. "Very well," she said. "St. Mary's has nothing to hide." But it did, and it was about to be exposed. Kelly's team split into 3 groups. Father Ryan led the Monsignor directly to the north wing, The door was still locked, still cold, still watched. This time, Sister Elizabeth tried to block them. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They are on the spiritual retreat. Breaking it would be dangerous to their souls." "Open the door," Kelly said. She hesitated. "Sister," he continued, voice hardening, "if you do not open it, I will consider you in violation of obedience and ecclesiastical law. You will be excommunicated before nightfall." Tears welled in her eyes, but she stepped aside. The key turned with a heavy click. What they found inside would be written into the church's darkest internal record. The room had once been a storage closet 15 feet wide, damp and windowless, but now it housed 5 nuns, skeletal, pale, filthy. The stench of human waste and unwashed skin choked the air. One woman was pregnant, her habit stretched unnaturally over her swollen stomach. Another whimpered in the corner, rocking and mumbling prayers through cracked lips. Father Ryan recognized one of them instantly. Sister Rebecca Murphy. She rose weakly, clutching the wall for support. Her voice was barely audible. "Father, you came back." She tried to smile, but her lips split with the effort. "They were preparing us for the doctor for the house in Chicago." Monsignor Kelly knelt beside her, appalled. "What doctor?" She swallowed, eyes darting toward the door. "Dr. Matthews," she whispered. "He comes to examine us, to see which ones are pure. They pay more for the innocent ones." The room fell silent, and then it exploded into action. Father Ryan and the Monsignor ordered water, food, and blankets. The 5 imprisoned women were removed immediately and escorted under guard to a neighboring parish. But that was just the beginning. In Sister Margaret's infirmary quarters access via a hidden door behind a false cabinet, the priests found medical ledgers, chloroform bottles, and detailed notes tracking menstrual cycles and sedative dosages. Each victim had been assessed and valued. Transferred, Sister Agnes O'Connor. Package delivered to Chicago. Condition, excellent. Price, 400. Terminated, Sister Teresa Donovan. Resistance noted. No commission. Downstairs, priests reviewing financial records found coded payments, thousands of dollars deposited under euphemisms like Charity Bundle A and Special Commission B, each correlating with the dates of a nun's disappearance. Back in the chapel, Father Ryan found Mother Catherine still waiting, still unmoved. "We serve a higher purpose," she said quietly. "Your minds are too small to comprehend it." She did not resist when placed under ecclesiastical arrest, but that night she vanished from her locked room without a trace. And the true horror was just beginning to unravel. The next morning, all of Wisconsin knew something had happened at St. Mary's. Villagers awoke to carriages racing down muddy roads, whispers passing from farmhouse to farmhouse like wildfire. The church tried to suppress it, but it was too late. By noon, word had spread. The convent's been raided. They found bodies. They weren't nuns. They were slaves. The truth was worse than anyone could imagine. Monsignor Kelly remained at the site for 3 days. His report, sealed within Vatican archives, would describe St. Mary's as a sanctified house of horrors, rotted from the altar outward. It began with the surviving nuns. Of the 23 who had entered the convent over the past 8 years, only 3 were found alive. 5 were dead either through starvation, suicide, or what appeared to be surgical experimentation. The rest was simply gone. One grave was discovered behind the chapel, beneath a rose bush. It contained 2 bodies, both female, neither buried with ceremony. No records, no names. The church had never recorded these deaths. No funerals were held, no prayers offered. Inside the convent's hidden cellar, accessed through a locked trap door beneath the refectory, priests found more damning evidence. Dozens of torn habits, broken rosaries, blood-stained bedding, a metal table bolted to the floor. Along the walls, carved into the stone, were names: Agnes, Josephine, Ruth, Lucia, Teresa. The sister had scratched them in one by one until her fingernails gave way to blood. Then there were the documents, letters, ledger books, receipts. The convent had not been a house of God. It had been a grooming hub, a pipeline for trafficking women under the guise of religious purity. And behind it all was a network that extended far beyond the chapel walls. Dr. William Matthews, listed in several records, had once been expelled from Harvard Medical for unethical experiments. He was later hired by private clients in New York and Chicago for psychiatric discretion regarding women with hysterical impulses. He disappeared from Boston records in 1852, the same year St. Mary's was founded. Several letters referenced guests from Chicago and St. Louis, unnamed men of influence, wealthy donors, state officials, even one unsigned letter from someone who claimed to serve in the courts of law. They all thanked Mother Catherine for her hospitality. But who was Mother Catherine really? Her birth name was never found. No baptismal records, no religious vows traced to any Catholic order in the U.S. or Europe. Her existence began in 1853 with a forged letter of recommendation, likely written by Bishop Henny himself. Sister Elizabeth, during questioning, finally broke down. Her hands shook as she confessed. "We weren't real," she said. "Not in the way you think. We were chosen, trained, placed. We were told we were helping to save the world, one soul at a time." "And Sister Margaret?" asked Monsignor Kelly. Elizabeth hesitated, then said quietly, "She was a midwife until she met him, the doctor. He taught her how to see women as ingredients." By the third day, law enforcement attempted to arrest the remaining clergy tied to the site, but most had already disappeared. Dr. Matthews was never seen again. Bishop Henny resigned due to health concerns 2 months later and fled to South America. No charges were ever formally filed. Instead, the Vatican closed the matter quietly. The official record? St. Mary's was deemed a failed spiritual experiment, disbanded due to financial mismanagement and internal conflict. The survivors were transferred to cloistered orders, their silence bought with monthly stipends and the threat of excommunication. The building itself was sold to private hands and demolished in 1861. But some stories don't die with demolition. In 1912, construction workers laying foundations for a textile mill near Veracruz, Mexico, uncovered two mummified bodies in a sealed brick room beneath an old stone rectory. They wore the faded remains of Catholic habits. Pinned to one of the corpses was a rusted cross and a note written in Latin. "We failed him. He is hungry still." Local authorities buried the bodies. No identification, no follow-up. But the names were whispered. Mother Catherine, Sister Margaret. No death certificates, no autopsy, no acknowledgement by the Church. To this day, the Vatican has never spoken publicly about the events at St. Mary's. But in the shadows of diocesan libraries and the margins of forbidden text records remain photographs, names, a single torn page from Sister Mary's diary preserved only because Father Ryan hid it in his Bible. It reads, "They come at night. They ask for the pure. They take, and we kneel while they do it. The convent is gone. The fields have grown over. A gas station now sits where the north wing once stood. But sometimes, just after dusk, people say they hear singing. A soft, cracked voice, a woman's voice, repeating the same Latin phrase over and over again. Domine, libera nos. Domine, libera nos. Lord, deliver us." The events at St. Mary's Convent should have shattered the Church. They didn't. Instead, they were buried carefully, methodically, in silence and smoke. But some scars refuse to fade, no matter how deep you dig. Father Thomas Ryan never returned to the priesthood after the investigation. Officially, he took a leave of absence for health reasons. Unofficially, he was told to stay quiet for the good of the Church, for the protection of the faithful. He moved to a small cabin near Green Bay, where he lived alone until his death in 1883. His journals discovered only after his passing detail his growing paranoia. He wrote of being followed, of men without names, and of a letter he received from an anonymous bishop warning, "If you value your soul, forget what you heard behind that door." Inevitable. His final entry reads, "I still hear her, in dreams, her voice calling, not to me but to something else. It waits beneath the floor." The surviving nuns were scattered. Sister Mary Collins, the brave soul who sent the letter that started it all, was relocated to a monastery in rural Ireland under a false name. She never took vows again. For the rest of her life, she worked in silence, carving crosses into wooden beads. Dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands each, one different, each one a name. None of her carvings bore her own. One of the rescued women, Sister Rebecca, attempted suicide 2 years after the convent's closure. Her note said only, "They were preparing us for him." She was buried under an unmarked stone. The other two survivors lived quiet lives in cloistered silence. One took a vow never to speak again. The other developed what physicians then called religious melancholia. Today we'd know it as PTSD. The Vatican's internal report, never released to the public, was titled Case File 73A, Events at House of St. Mary the Veiled. It was restricted to only the highest echelons of the Church. Even today, any request to access it is met with redirection or disappearance. But over the years, pieces have leaked, pages smuggled out, a photograph of the iron door, a blurry sketch of the cellar table, a list of initials believed to be the clients who visited St. Mary's under the cloak of night. Some of those initials match names etched in American history: politicians, judges, railroad tycoons, men who shaped the frontier and apparently corrupted it. The convent's physical remains were leveled, burned, blessed, but one section of the foundation was too strong to demolish an old wall from the north wing. It still stands, covered in ivy, in the rear lot of a gas station outside Manitowoc. Locals call it the prayer wall, though few know why. One teenage girl, in 1972, reported seeing a pale woman standing in front of the wall, whispering. She vanished 2 days later. Her body was never found. Only her rosary, half melted, was recovered in the dirt nearby. The clerk who found it said it smelled like blood and frankincense. Since then, the wall has been fenced off. Teenagers dare each other to touch it. Some say it's just stone. Others say they hear voices when they lean in close. One boy claimed he heard someone behind it whisper, "We remember." In 1994, an anonymous envelope arrived at a Milwaukee news station. It contained a photograph of a nun in a dimly lit room, her face obscured by shadow. Behind her, nailed to the wall, was a child's dress. Beneath the image were 6 words. "It's not over. It never ended." The station never aired the photo. 2 weeks later, it burned down in a mysterious electrical fire. To this day, the Church has never acknowledged the St. Mary's case. There are no public records of the convent, no surviving blueprints, no mention of Mother Catherine, Sister Margaret, or Dr. Matthews in any diocesan database. But if you look, really look, you'll find the signs. In certain Catholic hospitals, in dusty church basements, in the forgotten corners of diocesan libraries, you'll find names, carved into old furniture, scribbled into hymnals, pressed between pages of scripture. The same names scratched into the stone walls of that terrible north wing: Agnes, Teresa, Lucia, Ruth, Mary, and then there's the last one. Unfinished, etched in trembling hand, Catherine, no last name, no origin, no grave. Only a question: what was St. Mary's really built for? Was it ever meant to be a convent? Or was it always a gatey and opening to something ancient, cruel, and deeply patient? Because if you listen closely, even now, you may still hear them. The missing, the silenced, the ones who wore the veil but were never allowed to remove it. They are still waiting, still whispering, "Domine, libera nos. Lord, deliver us." It's easy to forget them. That's what time is for. To bury, to obscure, to smooth over the rough edges of memory until what was unbearable becomes background, a ghost behind a locked door in history's cathedral. But what happened at St. Mary's was not an accident. It was not the work of a few corrupted souls hidden behind collars and crosses. It was a system, a machine that wore a mask of holiness and devoured the faithful one by one. And in the years since, it has simply evolved. The Church moved on. New dioceses, new buildings, new orders. But always there were women who disappeared without explanation, nuns reassigned to nowhere, letters that stopped arriving, novitiates closed due to lack of vocations, chapels sealed for renovation that never reopened. The architecture changed, the names changed, but the silence remained the same. You see, the horrors of St. Mary's weren't just physical, they were spiritual violations. The distortion of the sacred into something transactional, a ritual of pain masked as piety. The doctor was never just a man. The rituals weren't just abuse. And Mother Catherine? Perhaps she was never born at all. Some say she appears in dreams, especially to young women entering the novitiate, a pale figure standing at the foot of their bed, silent, watching, her lips moving without sound, her eyes like glass dipped in milk. Others say she is still recruiting, still offering obedience, purity, sacrifice in exchange for something unnamed. And some have followed. In 2018, a nun in Ontario reported seeing an old wooden chest arrive at her convent. No sender, no label. Inside were habits, dozens of them, all identical, all hand stitched, and each one bore a name stitched along the collar. They were names from St. Mary's. The chest was destroyed, the convent closed within the year. No one spoke publicly, but a single post appeared on an obscure religious blog 2 weeks later. The habits are empty, but they remember the bodies they wore. We live in an age where truth is often drowned by noise, but behind the noise, behind the doctrine, behind the incense and velvet, the rituals still breathe. Some say the stones used to build St. Mary's were quarried from land cursed long before Catholic hands touched it, that it was a place of screaming trees and black waters, long feared by the native tribes, that no church should have ever risen there. Some say the devil doesn't hide in fire. He hides in faith, faith that demands obedience without question, faith that replaces love with submission, faith that turns women into property and calls it salvation. This was never just a story about missing nuns. This was about what happens when silence is made sacred and what waits in that silence when no one comes to break it. So if you find yourself near the old foundation, if you feel the cold breath of something watching as you light your candle, if you hear your name whispered from behind a wall that shouldn't be there, do not answer, do not kneel, and above all, do not follow the singing. What happened at St. Mary's was not just a story lost to time, it was a wound left open. And some wounds never truly close. Long after the convent was razed to the ground, after the altar was dismantled and the bones were scattered beneath new soil, something remained, something deeper than brick and limestone, something embedded in the land itself. Locals say no birds ever return to the trees that once surrounded the chapel, that no grass grows in the shadow of the old foundation, that machines break down when construction crews try to drill too deep. Some say they hear chanting in the pipes beneath the gas station, now built over the site soft, lilting female voices. And others see her, a tall figure in black, pale face, eyes that shine not with light but with the reflection of something watching through her. She stands at the edge of the old north wing, not walking, just standing, waiting. Her name is never spoken, but the land remembers it. Catherine, it's always the same. A young woman, usually alone, sees her near dusk. Then the dreams begin. Nightmares of stone walls closing in, of cold water rising up to the mouth, of needles, metal tables, of hymns sung backward, of eyes that blink too slowly, and always the singing, Domine, libera nos, Domine, libera nos. Those dreams never leave. One woman, a college student studying theology in Madison, reported that after visiting the old site, she began drawing the same image every night in her sleep pages, upon pages of a nun with a severed tongue, standing inside a circle made of rosaries. She was later found wandering a cemetery barefoot, mumbling Latin prayers she had never learned. She is still institutionalized, and yet no one speaks of it. The Catholic Church, to this day, maintains that St. Mary's was a local scandal, exaggerated by hysteria and folklore. No documents remain in the diocesan archives. The original blueprints of the convent are missing. The Vatican has never responded to inquiries about Case File 73A. But behind closed doors, in whispered gatherings, some priests still warn each other. Never trust a convent built on cursed land, and never, ever trust the ones who smile too much. Because it wasn't just about St. Mary's. It was the beginning. There are patterns, traces. In 1876, a convent in Missouri burned to the ground. The survivors were elderly nuns, and a deaf orphan girl claimed it was punishment from the angel with bleeding hands. In 1919, a cloister in upstate New York was abruptly abandoned. A letter left behind simply read, "He returns tonight. The wombs are not ready." And in 1964 in France, an entire order of nuns vanished overnight. Their final correspondence to the Archbishop referenced a Marian apparition that instructed them to prepare the others. No bodies were found, only their habits neatly folded on the pews. No public explanation was ever given. Each of these cases shares similar elements: a mysterious figure in black, strange hymns, hidden rooms, women marked for disappearance, and all walls one authority structure that fails to protect. Or worse, participates. The darkness that seated itself in St. Mary's did not die there. It spread, slowly, quietly, along railroads, through letters, through whispered prayers disguised as obedience. There are maps, secret ones you'll never find on any pilgrimage trail or diocesan pamphlet. They mark the veiled sites, places where the church sent its shame to die in silence. But the silence was alive. One exorcist, working under a false name, once claimed that during a case involving a possessed nun in Arizona, the entity spoke in a voice matching Mother Catherine's. The demon didn't curse or threaten, it simply recited a list of names. Names of women long forgotten, women who vanished before the turn of the century. When asked why it spoke those names, the entity replied, "They belong to us. Their prayers are ours now." And what of Dr. William Matthews? He was never caught, never even charged. But reports of a traveling physician with uncanny knowledge of female anatomy and a strange obsession with preserving virgin minds began appearing in medical journals across the U.S. and Mexico from the 1860s through the 1880s. He used many aliases, always male, always well-funded. One report filed anonymously in 1880, one claimed a surgeon matching Matthew's description had been seen performing non-consensual cranial operations on women declared religiously hysterical. These were not treatments. They were lobotomy-screwed, brutal and fatal. Several of the women had been nuns. Another entry, written by a nurse who fled one such facility, described him as a man who never blinked, who called his victims vessels, who said pain is the only honest prayer. His trail ends in Guatemala, where an unmarked grave near a monastery carries the name Mateo Blanco. Some say it's him, others say it's someone else, someone sent to continue his work. And what of the rituals? To the outside world, what happened at St. Mary's was criminal, but to those who orchestrated it, it was sacred, a dark form of consecration, not for the God of light, but for something older, something buried beneath the doctrines and the candles and the incense. There are fragments copied by scribes who died unnamed, texts that speak of the veiled bride, a being who feeds on silence, purity, and suffering, who offers knowledge in exchange for innocence, who marks her followers not with blessings but with absence. They called her Mater Dolorosa Inversa, the inverted mother of sorrows. It was to her that the prayers of St. Mary's were offered, not in joy, not in hope, but in screams, in silence, in blood. And the church knowingly or not allowed it. So what are we to do with this story? What do we do with the names of women erased from every history book, every hymnal, every wall? We remember not with candles, not with statues, but with the truth. They were not transferred. They were not disobedient. They were not mentally unwell. They were sacrificed because they believed in something holy. And others used that belief to build a doorway into hell. If you've made it this far, you may be asking, why me? Why did I find this? Perhaps you were always meant to. Perhaps you are a keeper of names now. So when you see a nun walking alone near dusk, when you hear prayers echoing in an empty chapel, when you find a rosary buried where no one should have been, remember them, whisper their names into the silence, and never, ever follow the singing, because the door is still open and someone is still listening.